I'd like to introduce to you a person I don't think who's ever been up on this stage in the public before. He is our Chief Technical Director here, a member of the Board of Trustees of Friends of the Loews, and the gentleman who rebuilt, well actually along with Steve Levy, rebuilt, and a few other people, rebuilt our projection booth. He's chiefly responsible for rebuilding it, Mr. Robert Everens. Bob? Bob has spent many years in the motion picture industry, both behind the camera and in the production of equipment for it. And I couldn't think of anyone more appropriate than Bob to introduce our evening's special guest.
I'd like to, on behalf of the Technical Committee of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, I would like to welcome Ray Harryhausen, one of the geniuses, if not the genius, of the motion picture industry. And here he is, I think, right now.
I neglected to point out that we will actually have two Academy Award winners on this stage this afternoon, Mr. Harryhausen and Mr. Everens, so we are truly honored. The format of the evening is we're going to spend about a half an hour talking with Mr. Harryhausen. I get to play MC for a little while, and I hold in my hand some of the questions that you folks wrote out and left out in the lobby, and we'll start going through those in just a few moments. But Ray, first of all, when you go before groups like this, are there any particular questions that always come up, or things that never come up that you wish were asked?
Well, usually I have to explain dynamation. A lot of people don't realize that the word dynamation means dynamic animation. In the early days, journalists used to say, even as far back as Mighty Joe Young in 1949, the journalists would say this picture has animation in it. And the word animation had always been associated with the flatbed cartoon. So people thought it was a cartoon. So we tried to establish a new name for the dimensional animation, and we called it dynamation. So that's how it started, to try to distinguish it from the cartoon, the animated cartoon. And then the publicity people felt we needed another name on the next picture, so they called it super dynamation. And then the next picture, they called it electrolytic dynamation. And finally they went to Dynarama, which has nothing to do with animation at all, but that's the publicity.
Well, I'd like to take you back actually to perhaps pre-Dynamation, you might say, and how you got started in this. The legend, the story, and in your book, it says you were charmed by it by King Kong.
Absolutely. It's all in the book.
It's all in the book.
Yes. So those who have the book will know all the answers. No, King Kong started it off in 1933. My aunt worked for Sid Grauman, his mother, and his mother was an invalid, and he gave my aunt three tickets. So my mother and my aunt and I myself went to see this strange gorilla picture, which was playing at Grauman's Chinese. And when I came out of the cinema, I haven't been the same since. So it shows how influential a film can be. I'm just glad I didn't latch on to Edward G. Robinson and Little Caesar. I could have been a godfather today.
What was the first thing you made, or some of the first creations, figures you made in your garage at home?
Well, I didn't know how Kong was done when I first saw it. I was just awestruck. They had the big bust in the foyer of the Chinese theater, and it wasn't until maybe 6 months later that I realized that they had used a process called stop motion, which was taking a series of individual still pictures on motion picture film. And that hooked me. I felt if I used to make little models of the La Brea tar pits, and I saw how I could make them move. So I made a cave bear and various other experiments in my garage. And over the years, it developed from a hobby into a profession.
I asked you this before, so it's a loaded question. I said, did your parents think you were crazy? Did they haul you off?
No, they didn't. They were very supportive, and they didn't know where it would end. There was no such profession as stop-motion animation in those days. Willis O'Brien was about the only one to practice it. But they never tried to discourage me, and in my early days, I did some fairy tales and experiments, and they always cooperated. My father made the armatures. He was a machinist by trade. And that encouragement at an early age, I think, was enormously helpful.
I read in your biography that when you went into the Army, you were able to use some of your skills there. What were you making? Training films or that?
Yes, when the war came along, I was still working at George Pal's and making puppetoons, animated puppetoons. And then the war came along, and I knew I'd have to be drafted sooner or later, or volunteer. So I thought I'd sign up for something I could do. So I signed up to be a combat cameraman. And I didn't realize they were shot like clay pigeons, at the time. And but in the meantime, while I was still going to night school at the Columbia Pictures and Eastman Kodak, I made this little picture. I thought, well, maybe they would be interested in seeing how animation could be used in training films. So I made this little 4-minute picture, and I showed it to my teacher, and he showed it to Frank Capra, who was just starting the Special Service Division. And I got transferred from being a combat cameraman into the Special Service Division. And there I worked with Dr. Seuss on the Snafu cartoons and all the Why We Fight series.
When you started to do your own work after you worked with, or even as you were working on Mighty Joe Young, and then you went on to your own productions, your legend is that you helped refine and develop the techniques to make it more practical and cost-effective. Are there a couple things that really come to mind as the most important innovations you did, or was it just a series of slight tweakings along the way as you worked on? What would you tell people that you did to make it easier and more affordable for the studios?
Yes, I tried to simplify it because we had 4 glass painters on Mighty Joe Young, and 4 projectionists and 4 cameramen and their assistants. We had a big crew of about 27 on the miniature department, and that wasn't the total cost, but RKO, we were the only picture for about 2 years working on at RKO, and Howard Hughes had just bought the studio, and no one else was making a picture there, so they dumped all the overheads of the heads of the department onto our budget, and it made picture Mighty Joe Young looked like it cost over $2 million, which was a very sizable sum at that time. So nobody was knocking at O'Brien's door when he won the Academy Award for special effects on Mighty Joe. And for years, he took illustrations around, and I took illustrations around, and nobody was interested in stop motion animation, even though Mighty Joe Young was a success. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was a success.
So what you did was find ways to make it more affordable?
Yes, well, I tried to simplify it so that one man, I find stop motion requires enormous concentration, and I prefer to work alone. So I started to learn to do everything myself. I learned how to cast, I learned how to edit film. I went to night school at USC while I was still in high school, and no, that was later, after the war. And then I went to art school so I could put my ideas on paper so other people could see what they were like. And I'm glad, over the years, they all came together. I didn't see an end at the time they were happening, but in the end, it all seemed to be foreseen, or what would you call it? The fickle finger of fate brought it all together finally.
You're very well known, obviously, for your stop-motion work, but you also were heavily involved in all aspects of the production.
Absolutely, yes.
Did you get script reviews? Did you visit the sets for principal photography? Talk a little bit about your involvement other than the stop motion.
Yes, unlike most motion pictures, our pictures are not like the European sense of the word, a director's picture. We hire the director later to watch for the actors, to get the best out of the actors. Our pictures are created by Mr. Schneer, Charles Schneer, myself, and the writer. Many times I bring in the story. I brought in the story of the Seventh Voyage, the Emir, and 20 Million Miles to Earth, and the other two Sinbad pictures. And I always work with the writer because he doesn't know what I can do on an inexpensive way. So I have to make drawings, and they're incorporated into the script, and of course they become the words of the writer. So the writer gets credit for the sequence, but actually they were designed, my drawings, before they entered the script. And that's the way we had to make these pictures so that we could make them for a price. Otherwise, that accounts for our longevity, I think. We never had interference from the front office. Harry Cohn never interfered with us, and we were left to do it because we could make pictures so reasonable that they couldn't help but make a profit.
We're going to start in with the questions from the audience in just one moment. I wanted to ask Bob if he wanted to ask Ray something.
Yeah, I'm going to hit him with a rough one. What do you think of the computer animation today?
Well, I get asked that question all the time. I think it's marvelous. A little golem, to think that character was computer generated is quite remarkable. It's a wonderful tool. I don't see it as a be-all and buy-all. I think there's room for every technique. Thunderbirds brought back the string puppet, and Kermit the Frog brought back the hand puppet for entertainment. And after all, the end product is to entertain, no matter what technique you use. And if you make fantasy, I've always felt if you make it too real, like a documentary, it loses the whole quality of a dream world. King Kong, half this fascination to me when I saw it on a big screen was I didn't know how it was done. It gave me that feeling of a nightmare quality that for some reason, if you make it too smooth or too realistic, it loses that quality of a dream world.
Good. I agree with you.
The first question that I have here from the audience, I think pretty much everyone in the audience would want to ask and would like to know the answer to. How does it feel knowing you've influenced generations of special effects artists throughout the world? How does that feel?
Well, I'm delighted. I mean, I never expected it. All I set out to do was to make a rip-roaring good film. And I'm so grateful. At some of these conventions I attend, a generation of a family come up and tell me, my father saw your films And he taught us to see the film, and I'm teaching my child. And I'm grateful for that because it shows we've left a positive influence. And some of the pictures today, I think, are going to breed a generation of delinquents.
Why does the octopus in It Came from Beneath the Sea only have 6 tentacles?
You're not supposed to know that. Unfortunately, why does Mickey Mouse only have 4 fingers? We were on a very tight budget with that film, and if we'd cut the budget anymore, I think we'd have a tripod. But nobody knew this until Forey Ackerman interviewed me for Famous Monsters, and somehow I let it slip that the octopus only had, nobody would have known it because half of the tentacles were under the water. So I let it slip. I should have kept my mouth shut. It got out of proportion. Some said it was 5 tentacles, some said it was 4 tentacles. But anyway, it gave the impression we wanted.
How do you like Bernard Herrmann's scores for your films?
The what?
How do you like Bernard Herrmann's scores for your films?
Oh, he was superb. I mean, he did 4 of our films. His style of music just fit our pictures perfectly. He was a rather cantankerous man, and if you talked about some other composer, he'd blow his top, and he had a reputation of being very outspoken, and we held our breath when we showed him The Seventh Voyage because it was incomplete. He wanted to see the film before he decided whether to do it or not. And he had done wonderful films for Hitchcock, and of course he did Citizen Kane and A Magnificent Ambush. But we were holding our breath that he might not like it. But he saw the films, and the film, The Rough Cut, and a lot of the animation was missing. And I showed him the drawings and my continuity sketches, and we became good friends afterwards, and he decided to do The Seventh Voyage. And I think that was one of his great contributions. It helped Seventh Voyage enormously.
This is like one of those essay questions you get in school. What film provided your greatest working experience and why?
Oh my. Well, every film you have a sequence that you fall in love with is the reason you do it. I think I like the more complicated ones like the Hydra. The skeleton sequence, we took 2 weeks to shoot the live action for a 5-minute sequence, and it took me 4 months to put it all together. So that was a very slow process. You'll see that on the screen in this glorious big screen here. Those who see it on the Idiot Box for the first time, it's not the same picture. You've got to see King Kong and our films and Cecil B. DeMille films on a big screen for the first time, because it's an entirely different film. So I hope you'll enjoy it this evening.
Now here's someone who writes, no question, just wanted you to know that, well, the author says, I named my 16-year-old son Jason. Read Jason and the Argonauts, and he's honored to be here tonight.
Thank you. Yes, I signed many books for young people called Jason. It wasn't a popular name years ago, but seems to be more popular today.
This is sort of a follow-up to Bob's question, although I think you can take it in a number of directions. Do you think the artistic quality has been lost in the animation of today?
Well, I think there's some very good ones. BBC made a documentary called Walking with Dinosaurs, which was beautifully done, I thought. They did things you couldn't do very easily with animation. They had herds of brontosauruses walking off into the sunset while the camera was moving as though it were in a helicopter. Well, that would be very difficult to do in stop motion. So CGI has a lot of advantages, and there are some fine things. Jurassic Park had some remarkable images in it. But unfortunately, today with television and the computer, in a 30-second commercial, you see the most amazing images. So the amazing image is no longer unique. In the 50s, it was a shock to see a cyclops on the screen. It was impressive to see a two-headed rock and that type of thing. But today, you're so inundated with amazing images that they become mundane, I think.
Well, one of the things we were talking about earlier in the afternoon, one of our dinner partners brought up, was the quick cut you see today in everything.
Yes, that's usually a technique, an 8-frame cut to disguise the fact there's nothing there, you know. They're so busy today trying to make silk purses out of sow's ears that they forget that the whole point of a film is to tell a story that's comprehensible. How many of you understood The Matrix? I didn't know quite what I was looking at. It was beautiful and special effects, but all you saw were a series of amazing effects. I didn't know what they were trying to tell you or if they were trying to tell you anything. I don't think I'm retarded.
And I have to add, since I think it's only fair, since Mr. Harryhausen has shared his thoughts and asked that last question, to reassure him, unless I'm retarded. I told him at dinner that one of my good friends had gotten The Matrix, and we were watching it on a big screen TV, and she and a couple other people were enwrapped in it, and I sort of got up and snuck out of the room quietly and went home and went to sleep. It didn't do anything for me.
Better to be unconscious.
Yes. Here's someone who says, first of all, thanks for being here, and anything new in the works? They're very hopeful you're working on anything?
Well, I finally finished a fairy tale I started back in 1950. Richard Schickel put out a program. I shot 4 minutes of animation of the tortoise and the hare, and Richard Schickel had some of it on his program. And 2 young fans wrote me in the year 2000 they'd like to finish the film. Well, I'd lost the script and lost all my designs, and so I had to reconstruct the script. And I saw some of their work, and I decided they could do it, and they did a wonderful job. The Tortoise and the Hare was finally finished after 50 years for a 10-minute film. So that will be included in my series. I'm going to put out a DVD by the end of the year or the beginning of next year of all my fairy tales. They'll include the Mother Goose stories that I made way back in the 40s, late 40s, and it'll include Little Red Riding Hood and Hansel and Gretel, Rapunzel, and the story of King Midas, along with the Tortoise and the Hare. It should be about an hour and a half, along with other goodies of experiments that I made over the years.
We have a person who would like to know what advancements or refinements did you make in the armature construction of the figures, say, for Jason and 1 million years BC from those of Mighty Joe Young and Beast of 20,000 Fathoms?
Well, the armatures are basically the same, just like the camera is the same since Edison invented it. The bell and Howell movement is still used in the camera, and I think the armature of King Kong, Bob Burns brought the armature. He has the armature of King Kong and Mighty Joe Young. Everybody has one but me, and I did 90% of the animation. But their armatures haven't changed much. They're still have to be machined. They're very precision made, ball and socket joints along with hinge joints, and they haven't changed much over the years. Willis O'Brien liked to use the hinge joint more than the ball and socket, and I prefer the ball and socket, but they both serve the same function.
Why is Mighty Joe Young a flawless film?
A flawless film?
That's what someone wants to know.
Oh, well, It has a few mistakes in it. A couple of scenes I left my pointer in, and the people thought it was a mic boom or something for one frame. They didn't cut it out either. I was surprised. But don't start looking for all the seams. Well, I don't know. It could have been a better film, but it was a good film for what it was. And it was one of the highlights of my life to be able to work with my mentor, Willis O'Brien and Marion Cooper, on the film Mighty Joe Young. They were responsible for King Kong, and Willis O'Brien was responsible for The Lost World way back in 1925. So it was a pleasure to work with them. And I had, again, worked with Obie on The Animal World, which is seldom seen today. But that was a highlight of my life, I think, to work with my mentors.
Do you still have an inter-ossitor from This Island Earth, and will you be selling it on eBay anytime soon?
An inter-ossitor. I'm sorry, I didn't work on This Island Earth.
And I knew that, and I wanted to ask the question and see the reaction of Mr. Harryhausen and the person who wrote this question. So I take it, just to clarity, you won't be selling it on eBay anytime soon.
No, and I'm not the proud owner of inter-ossitor. No.
Well, here is a question I think you can answer that is fair to ask you. What is your favorite creature that you've ever animated? What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
I try not to because the others get jealous. But I like the complicated ones like Medusa and the Hydra. They're much more interesting to work on. A humanoid figure is much more interesting than, say, an animal with 4 legs. It's very hard to get sympathy for a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but I think we got sympathy for him in Valley of Guanji when he died in the church. Few people shed a tear. My wife still cries when King Kong falls off the Empire State Building. So I don't know. I think I like the more complicated creatures. Medusa's one of my favorite, and I think the skeleton sequence as well.
If you are thinking of getting into animation, doing animation, would you recommend studying anatomy?
Absolutely. Anatomy is very important. I remember when I just won a blue ribbon for second place at the Exposition Museum years ago, before the war, of my Stegosaurus. And I was rather proud of it. When I called up Obie O'Brien at MGM, I told him my interest. He said, come over and bring some of your models, because very few people were interested in animation at that time. So I loaded my Stegosaurus and a few other models in, and he looked at the Stegosaurus and he said, that's all very nice, but he says, your legs look like sausages. The Stegosaurus's legs, not mine, no. He said, the Stegosaurus's legs look like sausages. You better study anatomy. So I went back to night school and studied anatomy. And now some of my models look a little bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
How much did your creation's personalities owe to your own sensibilities as their father, especially in comparison to a film's script? The person is, how much does your creature's personalities owe to your own sensibilities?
Well, those all develop during the process of animation,
Really?
the personality,
Really?
yes. The details are never in a script. The script is a broad outline, usually, of the extremes. And that's why I like a single figure like Mighty Joe or King Kong or Medusa. You can put character in it. One pose leads into another. It may take you an hour to get it into a certain pose, and then that pose leads to the next pose. And then you remember. You have to have a good memory of remembering incidents and people and how a gorilla walks or how a lizard walks. And those all come back to you while you're animating. The more experience you have, the easier it becomes.
Did any of the creatures go off in a direction that you hadn't expected or surprised you when you were done and you looked at the movie?
Well, some of them, yes, they have. I think Medusa surprised me a bit, and she didn't turn me to stone, but I based her, frankly, on Joan Crawford. Not that I think Joan Crawford's a Medusa, no, but she had the type of face, a beautiful structure in her face, and I had her in mind when I modeled the model, but I had to make her look ugly, and Joan Crawford is anything but ugly. But I admire her acting ability, but you have certain people in mind. In King Midas, I had the genie, sort of Conrad Veidt influenced me in designing the genie. He was, to me, the definitive villain in The Thief of Baghdad that Alexander Korda made.
This is, I think this will be our last question, but I think it's a fitting way to end. If you had to do it all over again, would you change anything?
My goodness. No. I'm glad I did what I... The only thing I might change is that I regret that I was trapped in the low-budget filmmaking field for so long. I had to compromise, but it also made you how to think, how to get the best on the screen for as little money as possible. So it was a blessing in disguise. It's a two-edged sword because sometimes you have to sacrifice to get the picture made. And, but I really don't have any regrets. I'm so happy that I was able to pursue the career that I had in mind when I was growing up, and I was able to do that all through my life. And unfortunately, Willis O'Brien had so many projects disintegrate before they reached the screen. He designed many, and so I feel I've been blessed, so I'm happy that I did what I did.
Now, I have to say, I'm sure there are many other questions you have and things you'd like to know about Mr. Harryhausen. It's in the book, so you can still order the book online, I believe. It's in its second printing on Amazon, online from Amazon. Thank you. The man's doing his job here. On Amazon, there'll be, I assume, back in the bookstores soon. There's a second printing coming out, but look in Amazon, and it is a wonderful book. I've only had a chance to thumb through it, and as soon as, this weekend is over, I'm going to find a solid day somewhere and sit down and read it cover to cover. He's a fascinating gentleman, sir. And I would like to take one last opportunity. In talking with Mr. Harryhausen and his publicist, I was disturbed to learn that a lot of the media outlets in the New York area were just a little concerned that perhaps young people would not be that interested in Mr. Harryhausen's work. And I see an awful lot of young people in the audience here, so I know that there's absolutely no truth to that. And I also know, because on our own staff here at the Loews, we have a very talented artist. Well, we have several very talented artists, but this gentleman in particular often tries to make a unique poster for each of the film weekends we do. And on this occasion, he made up something that he would like to present to you, Mr. Harryhausen, and I'd like to bring Patrick Diaz out right now to give it to you.
Well, thank you.
I made this for you on behalf of the Friends of the Loews in Jersey City, and I hope you come back to visit.
Oh, wonderful. You drew this yourself.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Did you sign it? You got to sign it. Thank you.
Mr. Harryhausen, on behalf of Friends of the Lowe's, the City of Jersey City, and all of us here, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.